All right. Hi, and welcome to The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist, the show there I try to promote progressivism, left-wing politics, and critical thinking. And today I'm talking to Jeremiah, formerly Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah.
Yeah, I've got quite a history, don't we? I mean, it's good to say hi again. We haven't chatted verbally in a while, so it's good to
it's
catch
been
up.
a long time. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I guess that's relevant because where we've met each other, I guess is relevant to what you want to talk about today, I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. I guess before we get started, what should people know about you? Like, what's your political identity?
I guess I'm definitely a leftist. My flavor's a bit unspecified right now.
That's fair.
I used to be more anarchist. I feel uncomfortable identifying as an anarchist now, just because I feel like that precludes some commitments I might make, but I'm definitely pro like community organizing, pro labor union. Like the past year or so, actually my last year in grad school, people may not know, I guess I'll try and keep this very brief. I'll keep this very brief because
Sounds good.
In a lot of universities, students get a stipend. They perform research and also they teach in a lot of instances. So in many cases, grad students are both employees and students of the university. Mm-hmm. So that means they are workers. And there is actually quite a large amount of graduate student labor unions across the US. And my last year really got me experienced in hands on the ground, actual canvassing in my department, meeting other students and actually
Nice.
understanding what the actual process is. So regardless of whatever label I am, I do have a very labor and grassroots organizing lens of change.
Nice.
So
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I part of why I don't want to be an anarchist is more I think I kind of do want to be one, but then somebody will be like, if you call yourself this, then why do you believe this? And I don't want to get hung up on that. So
I hate those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I'm sure. Well, I mean, you know how it is. There's a very it's a not very helpful tendency to one-upsmanship among the left, and I don't find that very useful. So whatever. I'm vague is fine because I don't like labels. Okay, I don't like labels.
Okay, yeah, I get.
No, labels are fine, but I just can't get hung up on it right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I call myself an anarcho-communist. But yeah, whenever somebody comes, well, don't those disagree with each other and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
I'm just it's exhausting, right?
Right. I mean, I guess one thing, one of my hobby horses recently is, I think it's a good thing to display honesty and trust. One of my other hobby horses is science communication. And the big thing in SciComm right now is you can't the information deficient model is the model where people think, oh, people just don't know things because they're not informed. Right. But you can't to some extent that's true, but you can't just deliver the facts. You have to actually, part of informing people involves connecting and building trust with people. And so that's probably generalizable to a lot of things. So I wouldn't ever really want to be dishonest. So In some cases, I think the labels have a preconception that get in the way of like what
That's
like
fair.
your actual positions. So
Yep.
one of my top priorities is to display honesty and trust. I'm never going to like be duplicitous. A lot of my opinions may be unsavory to people, but I'm never really going to try and be, um, say one thing that really means something else. If that
Right.
makes
Right.
sense.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I guess it's one of those things. Like, it depends. A lot of words have like colloquial meanings, and then you move on. They have nothing to do with the political philosophy, and like people believe things about both the political philosophy and the word that aren't accurate with people who follow it. It's, so it's it's a lot.
Yeah,
But
there should also, as a side note, there should also be somebody who's focused on science communismication.
yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Well, yeah, somebody did there was a joking thread somewhere along the lines of that. Somebody called, I think it was Covens and Apathy, a science communist or
oh yeah, communist.
So,
I mean, it's probably I bet it's the same root word too. I think communication and commune. I think there's
something there.
I would put like probably $500 that it's the same root.
I could see it.
Yeah. Cool.
So we, like I say, we knew each other from the atheist community days. Mm-hmm. And there was a recent thread on Twitter where somebody asked the question, where did atheism discourse go? And then you had a reply thread.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's kind of was the impetus of me saying, hey, let's talk about this. So,
yeah, I mean, it makes sense. We've known each other from organized atheism. And I don't think it's an unimportant movement, like from the early 2010s. It's at least relevant for understanding the history of the online as it is right now. So
yeah, a lot of the same stuff, like the reactionary right, like a lot of this stuff was really intersected with a lot of the atheist online YouTube stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I think this has been discussed a lot, and there is a narrative. I don't think anybody actually characterizes it thoroughly accurately, and I think there's a limit to how accurately you can, because we don't know how many atheists there are in the West. We don't know how many atheists are existent in any country. It's hard to track down who counts in like a movement. I guess I'll refer to movement atheism, because new atheism, whatever. But it's a hard question. But like people, I think those who weren't organizing under movement atheism in the 2010s, at least in our like left circles, I think there is a bit of inaccuracy, because what tends to get focused on is, of course, what can't be ignored is new atheism, quote unquote, did come out of post 9/11 politics. That's where the Four Horsemen came from.
Yeah.
And of course, Sam Harris has gotten. He was reactionary at the time. He was, a decade ago. You can see basically a great replacement theory. He wouldn't have put it under that term. Who else? Hitchens, of course, was like pro-Iraq war. And Dawkins has foot and mouth disease. pretty much.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, and one thing I think is a bit inaccurate is that, at least from a left perspective, I think to smear new atheism, they tend to focus on how anti-Muslim and anti-Islam exclusive the movement was. And I think to a large extent that is true of like the New Horsemen. Maybe uh, absolving Dan Dennett, but whatever. I don't want to get hung up on that. Like, but for the rest of us in organized atheism, you would see organizations popping up in the late 2000s, early 2010s. I'm in the U.S. at least. There's the FFRF, the geez, what is I already forgot what that stands for, but you've got the American Humanist Association. You've got these organizations that have almost no choice but to be like more anti-Christian because they're, fighting for, separation of church and state.
Yeah.
And of course, I know you're Canadian, so but I think when you look at the actual orgs, they had almost no choice but to be, like, if anything, anti-Christian. But you'd also see other organizations that weren't focusing their political activism on like crosses on federal property or something. It would be on pro-choice activism or like pro-LGBTQ activism.
Right, right.
So I think that is a large contingent. I don't know if you'd agree with all that, but I think there's a value to putting a little bit more nuance into the early days of movement atheism.
Yeah, looking back, I can see it a lot more as like you say, like it was very anti-Christian. There was a lot of Islam stuff, but I recall quite often we would get I would get accused of never criticizing Islam because I was afraid of them by Christians when I was criticizing Christian
right
stuff. What I would have considered overreach. And I mean, I still do, for the most part, consider a lot of that stuff overreach by Christian theocrats in a lot of ways. But yeah, I can see where, like, I'm still in that boat, right? Like I still, in a lot of ways, right? I'm still an atheist.
So. Right. I think I'm still deeply sympathetic. So I think this actually ties into like one of the points I would like to drive home. I think a lot of movement atheism, it had I think it had idealism sort of baked into its ideology.
Yeah.
And that's idealism, like historical idealism, not in the colloquial sense, but in the like Hegelian sense. Like I think there was a lot more like assumptions of like say democracy, which is I think the idea in movement atheism is people's regressive religious beliefs informed their regressive political beliefs, and that got enacted into politicians enacting those laws. And to some extent that's true, but I think you'd agree with me on this. Like we're in a fairly deeply undemocratic system, and our leaders don't necessarily reflect our own values, and furthermore, it may not be even the case that religious beliefs necessarily inform reactionary politics.
Yeah.
Over time, I think I've seen it more as whatever political or social beliefs you have often were mapped backwards onto your own religious beliefs and justified that way. It just
For
so
sure.
happens that the tradition tends to like lean towards what we would call reactionary or regressive.
Yeah,
So
I think that's accurate. Well, I mean, that's why you can see on both, say, the Democratic side or the Republican side and the far right, and even many on the left, using, like, discussing theology and,
right.
calling it theirs and saying that their version is the right one for their beliefs, because their beliefs are what dictates how they see their religion.
Right. Right. And again, to the idealist ideology, I guess one of the things that has changed for me in the past 5 years is because I've become more materialist in how I view political change. In that
Right.
it's not people's ideas shape the world around them. It's actually a bit in reverse. What systems are we living under? What media are people consuming? How are people living day to day? And that their surrounding environment more or less informs their politics. And of course, it goes both ways. Obviously,
Right.
it's not one thing or the other. But if you assume, highly democratic systems, you might think the world reflects, how people enact their beliefs. And that's not always necessarily the case. So,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
so I mean, but I also really don't want to sweep. I guess I don't want to sweep under the rug new atheism or movement atheism's reactionary tendencies, because they were certainly there.
Yeah.
Certainly, what precipitated that was a lot of Gamergate and Elevatorgate. I don't know if we need to get into the details. I don't
At
want.
this point, anybody on the
Yeah.
internet knows it, right?
Right. And if they don't, like, Google is free. But early 2010s, that very clearly, that very sharply divided, the clusters that existed. And so, I think where the idealism also comes in is that, um, a lot of atheists really, if they were actually for, I guess, progressive change, um, they saw the world through sort of a materialist lens, more or less. Um, and they saw, well, okay, my abstract opinions on beliefs in God are one thing, and maybe other people's beliefs in gods inform them to act in harmful ways. But what really matters is, making the world a better place for each other. And so, like, again, political activism towards, queer activism, pro-choice, things like that. And the other contingent was like, well, I just want to, like, I just want to consume atheist content. They wanted to
Yeah. Yeah.
watch YouTubes, read the blogs. Nothing wrong with just wanting to do that, I suppose. Though, I would say you should be. I would say it's a good thing to be organizing. But that sentiment, at least, is not necessarily bad. But I think that idealism sort of shaped that. Really, what the less activist portion wanted was just to, like, basically try and convert everyone to atheism, for lack of a better phrase. Like, I
Right.
don't want to be put words in their mouth, but I think that was more or less the conception. Just like, make everyone atheist, and then they'll start to be reasonable.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I think that sounds about right. I mean, that was always the goal, is like, even, I mean, Richard Dawkins once asked Christopher Hitchens, like, what would he do if we got rid of religion tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because that's the idea that we all had in some sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder, like, Was that ever, like, we thought that was the goal? Was that actually the goal? Or did we? Yeah, I don't know.
I think I could definitely attribute that to my thinking. I would say for myself between probably 2013 and maybe 2017. Well, I became an atheist in 2012, and for me, I watched a lot of the atheist experience, and
Yeah.
I was a total Matt Dillahunty fanboy, just crush him with logic and reason.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, like that was also like I think the atheist experience, just to take an example, really, tried to assume like everybody's beliefs came from like a few like basic assumptions and followed logically from there. And of course, humans don't actually. We don't have consistent beliefs. I don't have consistent beliefs. You don't either.
No, that's right.
And that's fine. I mean, it's not fine. That's just the nature of being
expecting
human.
Perfection in that way is unrealistic.
Yeah. But again, like it was like trying to convince non-religious people to be religious. And I think that was part of the part of the disagreement. Of course, like once Elevator Gate happened and once, Gamergate was part of that. Gamergate, I should mention, not explicitly like an atheist thing, but
no, that's right. Yeah.
But it was part of the momentum, because that's when around that time, then it became the social justice warriors are taking over. And so you get, right around before, like, say, the Trump era, you've got the SJW camp and the anti-SJW camp. Of course, there are nuances, but it was very vocal at the time, like that atheists should not engage in left-wing activism. And this is the point where I do want to share some nuance, because I think, again, I don't want to sweep right-wing atheist reactionary sentiment under the rug, but I do think overall, as a demographic, atheists do have, on the whole, better politics than
like even the people who were on the anti-SJW side of the atheist community, they were still like, they believed in pride marches and
that's true,
stuff like that. Like part of the fight against religion was, like you say, the fight for LGBTQ rights.
Yeah.
Although,
and I'd put money on
not so much
that,
all of
that even like the hardest anti-SJW, I would put like money on it that they were at least like pro-choice, like they weren't anti-abortion. But like, so I pulled up some data. This is from research. I don't know if you've talked to Juem Navarro Rivera. He's a social scientist, and he's part of the Socio-Analytica Secular Voices survey. It's sort of his hobby horse to survey a lot of secular people. Again, secular means a lot of things,
right? Yeah,
but like,
which is covered in this, right?
Yeah, right. But like, for example, when you're like looking at support for Donald Trump, for example, secular people were like only like 30. It was like 36% supported Donald Trump compared to what would the like 64%, something like that in this survey. Only 16%. No, I'm looking at the discrepancy wrong. I've got to look back at this survey. Poop. So they actually surveyed people. Do you think the following people, movements, or institutions have changed the country mostly for the better, mostly for the worse, or have not made much difference? And so like this is the
Right.
difference in percentage points. So like 36% fewer said Donald Trump was good than not, compared to 6% for the general population surveyed. Same with the religious right. In general, they were more pro-environmentalism. And again, I know we're on like, you and I are both like socialist people, so Joe Biden does not really represent our version of what like left-wing
Nope.
activism. That being said, like this doesn't count for nothing. Registered voters surveyed, Donald Trump to Joe Biden was 45 to 53%, so about even. For secular voters, it was 30 to 68%. And I don't think that's worth discounting. I think that's relevant.
Yeah, that's significant.
So, yeah. So, but I think what was really part of this reactionary contingent is that they were also very vocal. And I think this is actually when I talked to Juham Navarro Rivera about this a couple of years ago, who's, a political scientist. He thinks the faction of atheists that wound up in this group were overwhelmingly libertarian, like right-wing libertarian, which
sounds about right.
tend to be fairly vocal,
Yeah, that's right.
So,
yeah.
But, I don't know if you've met any Ayn Rand fans, but
yeah, there's a few of them.
Also an atheist.
Right.
Ayn Rand,
yeah.
also an atheist. Yeah. Like, yeah.
Which is, I think, was perhaps a selling point on some level, because a lot of people like would have venerated the atheism perspective, and then, been fed a whole bunch of really, really bad ideas.
Right. So. Exactly. So, I mean, I think that libertarian contingent may not necessarily have been that big. At this point, I don't know what data you could show to find them. Like, it's a very hard number to measure. But they're very loud. But when I talked to Juham about it, he seemed to think that there's a very individualist strain within atheism, which kind of makes sense. And, that certainly leads into libertarianism. That also feeds into, organizing versus anti-organizing. I was looking through the literature. I was trying to see if I could find anything else. Again, this is a very hard question to answer. I found another study. I might send you the link. It is, let's see. Sorry, I know we're doing this live. I should have pulled up the link earlier.
But it's not actually live. We're recording. So if it takes a long time, I can just cut it.
Yeah.
Do one of those cool transition things.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about this paper because it's very qualitative, but it's by Jonathan Simmons, Politics, Individualism, and Atheism, an examination of the political attitudes of atheist activists in a Canadian city. So there. Okay, we're
a Canadian city.
See, now I'm not just being provincialist over here. Right. Now we're an internationalist episode right here.
Perfect.
But this author actually seemed, and again, this isn't quantitative. There's like really no numbers or polling in here. But it really at least gets into some of the anti-organizational and like anti-collectivist sort of bent. And I really like this quote. He was interviewing a lot of people who are active in the city. I'll have to find I think it was in Alberta. I don't know. That's not a city. Whatever. Again, we're an international show, but the point, I'm going to read this quote. He was talking to atheist activists, and this one I think sort of encapsulates the sentiment. This person says, "We don't really engage in groupthink. This is going to sound egotistical, but we're not followers. Many of us have really had to struggle to leave religion, to turn away from our families and friends, and leave our communities. It's easy to do that in Canada, but I suspect that all atheists have a contrarian streak in them, and that makes them weary of groups." And so I think that sentiment, well, maybe not attributable to movement atheists as a whole, is at least very pervasive.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same. Like, if you were active in atheist groups online, you would often have there was groups that did Sunday assemblies and stuff. And you would often get the comments and the reactions from people saying, "Well, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't need a community. I don't want to be part of this.
Right.
Like, I don't want to go to a place and be part of a thing. I just want to be an atheist and I want to be able to leave me alone."
Right.
So, I mean, anecdotally, it fits my personal experience.
Right. And so, like, I think this really gets to, at least if not at least from a historical angle, like where new atheism came from, basically neocon reactionaries and Dan Dennett, though I wouldn't really call Dawkins not a neocon, whatever. I don't care. That's a different conversation.
Yeah, that's all right.
But at least my theory of change at this point is necessarily, organizing based. And that really does involve, building communities with people. And it's also really interesting to that they bring up groupthink. Groupthink was a fear among atheists. And of course, groupthink is bad. Flat out bad. I'll just say that. And that did lead to indoctrination among children into harmful beliefs. It's an epistemic roadblock. But I think it is a bit overdetermined what counts as groupthink.
Yes.
Because when you are driving an organization for a particular goal, there is very little you can do as an individual to change the world in general. But when you're organizing for a goal, the whole idea is to get a group together for that particular goal. And there may be a mission that everybody's on board with. So even if you're not 100% on board with, say, something a labor union is going for, solidarity is very important. And you have to recognize that, even if there are going to be disagreements, which there will be, what's important is that we recognize that, we have common interests. We're trying to advance those common interests. And so by organizing, hopefully we can actually democratically make assessments of the best course of action, put in the best material, resources, time, labor we can to changing our conditions, and then move forward, even if the goal isn't 100% yours. So in that sense, that is a bit antithetical to the contrarian individualist speak. And I should also add, groupthink is a thing that, say, labor unions really strive to try to avoid, at least in my experience.
Okay.
I mean, I've only been in one, but that was a concern. Like, we want as many workers' inputs as possible. And furthermore, it's not just my labor union. I've consumed a lot of organizing work in media, and that also is a concern. It's like anything,
I've
right?
Been
talking a lot, but yeah.
No, that's perfect. That's what the guest is for. Yeah. But that's like almost anything. If you have a group with that is trying to do a thing, that group has to have an ultimate goal that you all agree on, but you also want different perspectives on how to reach that goal, different, there's different nuances on what you're doing internally. Like some groups have a hierarchy, some groups just follow one leader for a little while, some groups elect leaders, and this is all situations that you have to figure out.
Right.
And individuals have those ideas, and but the goal is, is supposed to be the goal of the group, right?
Right, to advance the collective interest, which is often possible, especially in organized labor circumstances. So, like, I think that partially gets to the crux of it. And again, like what I put in that Twitter thread. So we've gone a bit through the history, and 2015, 2016 runs around. Of course, Donald Trump being elected. Although that's just an American phenomena, like it does affect the world at large, and other countries certainly had their right-wing reactionary takeovers, Bolsonaro being the most prominent one to my mind. Of course, like you've got Doug Ford, who's not like the prime minister, but certainly he's certainly a power on his own. Boris Johnson, so on. But I think at least, and this is partially just my way of viewing things. This is partially what informed my political change. But Donald Trump, one of the least religious people in politics, probably, absolutely not a Christian. Like, just doesn't behave like one in any sense. But make no mistake, he absolutely advanced Christian nationalist interests. Absolutely, 100%. They were,
but not out of his own real religiosity, right?
Right. But other things he advanced, like the Muslim ban for traveling, not really from anti-religious sentiments. That was more pro-Christian sentiments, like anti-Muslim sentiments. And then you began seeing like things that didn't really map cleanly on to religious versus non-religious. Richard Spencer was an atheist, is an atheist, and he's a neo-Nazi. And like when it came to developing like indivisible groups, I know that's normie democratic, electoralism, but you had to organize in churches, things like that. When sanctuary cities became more important in the U.S., and again, I'm just speaking about the U.S. because I live here.
Right. No, that's fair.
Churches were like sanctuaries for undocumented immigrants. And like one of the anecdotes I often share is after Charlottesville happened. That happened on a Saturday, horrible event, giant alt-right neo-Nazi rally, and Heather Heyer was killed by a car collision. There was a national reaction, and in Colorado, where I'm currently residing, there was a march, a big march. We blocked off one of the major streets and marched for like a mile and a half along the streets in the rain. But it started off at this park. It's Martin Luther King Park, and if you go to an action, there's almost always speeches at the beginning, and there are a lot of pastors, a lot of preachers. The black population in Denver, notably representative at this anti-white supremacy rally, and a lot of like churches with signs, a lot of people wearing church shirts. And like, I just bring this up anecdotally, but the local atheist orgs didn't so much as tweet about Charlottesville.
Right.
So that really drove home for me that like, this isn't really relevant for the local atheist organizations. Maybe it's not just religion that's causing this problem. like there is more to this story that's not cleanly mapping onto, religious versus non-religious, even if those correlations may exist.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and the thing, like you say, like a lot of the speakers at the event are pastors. I've spoken to people who have said that the church has been like a safe space for a lot of Black people in America. And I don't think we can discount that when when atheists, fight against religion. You can't be like, well, but that was bad. Well, because that wasn't.
Right. I mean, so like to go back to the civil rights movement, when you look at leaders such as MLK and Malcolm X, what's often discounted from those movements is how labor focused they were. And they would go, and these preachers that I'm bringing up, Malcolm X and MLK, though there's obviously a lot more, they would organize, garbage collectors, they would organize factory workers, but they would also hold meetings in churches because that's where the community is.
Yeah.
And I think there is something to like religious groups that I do kind of miss as an atheist, in that there is sort of a missing teleology towards like fighting for justice, like the path towards justice, that moral arc.
Right.
And there is sort of that missing, moral center that allows people to group together. And even if like, again, more materialist, but I'm saying that that center allows people to recognize their physical community and recognize that they have the capability to enact leverage, perform material actions, get in the way, disrupt, the system as it currently is. And when they build that community, you meet people in flesh and blood. You recognize that they're people too, trying to put food on the table, just trying to exist. And so like that builds solidarity that you can build towards a much, a definitive action that will create material change.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
Yeah. And it is, I guess in some ways we tried to do that in the atheist community, and we did get some of that, that community building, like seeing people in person. I guess nobody's seen anybody in person in a long time now, but
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, you put together a conference, like, and that was fun, right? Unironically.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun, and it was a great way to meet other people that, you felt like they thought like you. And like that's one of the things that, like, that individualist anti community ideal, it seemed to miss that. Like, we all went to a place and we felt like we belonged because we had a group of however many people who thought like us in some way, even if we didn't always agree on 100%. Right.
Right.
But
right. So, but those conferences were fun.
Oh yeah.
And you had Seth Andrews. I wonder what he's up to these days, but
I do not know because I don't follow him anymore.
Same.
Yeah. The number of people that I still follow from the atheist community is getting smaller still all the time.
Yeah, I'm actually all too aware of yeah.
Not to talk shit, but
yeah, I don't really care to throw shade on people, but you know,
but
I think a lot of people did recognize that there was that change coming, and and then weird stuff happened. Like, I think everybody on all ideological flavors more or less recognized it, because then you started seeing Sam Harris pal around with Jordan Peterson, who's like,
right.
He's very spiritually, theologically, like very not like materialist in any sense.
Yeah.
And whatever.
I recall, like, because in 2016, I did the podcast series of interviews discussing with other atheists social justice issues on both sides of the argument per se, right?
Yeah.
And there were people on the anti-social justice side and on the pro-social justice side that both told me, like, this, if we don't resolve this issue, the atheist community is finished.
Mm-hmm.
and we never really resolved it. We just all kind of went our separate ways.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. I can think of, like, you know, there's like a handful of podcasts still around. I guess for folks not in the know, between about maybe 2014 to 2016, there were so many atheist podcasts, like, too many. Like, there were hundreds.
Yeah, you actually couldn't listen to all of them.
Multiple hundreds and if not explicitly atheist, like secular or skeptical. Though skeptical is like, that group is like, it has overlap, but there's a different whatever.
Yeah, that's true.
Don't worry about that.
And when we talk about skeptical, like, there was a skeptical movement, and then there was YouTube skepticals.
Yeah. And you know, that was probably in the grand scheme of things, that was possibly more relevant to the internet. I think someone like TJ Kirk, the amazing atheist, probably had like more, you know, probably more follows on his platform than probably any podcast in the atheist podcast scene. And I think Sargon of Akkad, I think he was like atheist, but like he pretty much existed. His channel was in existence to like dunk on people and show what a rational person he was.
Yeah, that's right.
I wouldn't want to equate Sargon and TJ, but both expressed like a lot of, you know, reactionary sentiment. Also Thunderfoot, for sure. I'm probably missing some big names. Those are the big ones I can think of. But yeah, like, there was, I think after Trump, I guess, you know, people, at least in my experience, my theory of change had been challenged, and I had to change that for myself. I know you from like way back in 14, 15. So I know, I know you've been an anarchist for a long time. So I'm not going to say that your politics necessarily changed, but I would be surprised. What?
Yeah, I think that it's fair to say that they have, because I wasn't always like, I think, what year was it? 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. Right when I started my former podcast, I identified as an anarchist, but not in the left-wing anarchist way, right? I was really into a lot of libertarian philosophy, until at least I learned how flawed it was. So yeah, I mean, I've identified as an anarchist for a very long time, but I wasn't always where I am now.
Right. I mean, for myself, even though like I'm absolutely, you know, pro social justice in pretty much every sense, like absolutely 100% on that side. In my case, like, I have been a little more materialist. I don't want to say Marxist, but I will say like more Marxist than I was.
Right.
In the sense that like a lot of economics are actually playing into this. And I think that was reflected. I think, you know, again, when you have these people palling around with the IDW, for example, or say Ion Hirsi, or you know, whatever, I think there is generally a fear of a totalitarian communist state, you know, taking over. And it became apparent that, you know, religion wasn't, you know, again, also, I guess the first iteration of, you know, big socialism, as it were, had atheism as a core tenet. If you know, understand Leninism, and even, you know, Marxism. you can see how pervasive like anti-religious sentiment is.
Yeah.
But at this point, I think it became apparent that like organizing with religious people, as at least for me, was not even like a question. Like they're common working laborers, and we have common interests, and like our metaphysics don't necessarily have much to play with that at all.
Yeah, it became a point where you go from thinking, well, okay, there's something wrong with the way the person thinks because they're religious, to thinking, okay, they're a good person and they're fighting for the same things I'm fighting for. So I don't care what they believe outside of that.
Right. Well, and you can still care what they believe, but it doesn't take precedence, and it might just be like, you meet up at the bar with them and you're like, that's
Right.
interesting, and
You could even debate it perhaps, but
yeah. I mean, I'm the kind of person, I like arguing. I've gone to multiple parties where I get drunk and like argue theology with someone. I actually did have like I spent a New Year's Eve party. I think this actually was with an atheist because he cited Hitchens. But we got into the SJW anti-SJW debate. We got drunker as the night went on, and then it was New Year's Eve, and we were in the corner like going at each other. And somebody pulled us over. They're like, the countdown's starting, and we're like, oh! And then we did the countdown, and then once we said Happy New Year, we went right back to arguing.
Yeah, yeah, that's good.
So,
yeah,
that is a tangent, but I'm just that type of person. But at this point, like I think I could have an intelligent disagreement with a comrade,
yeah,
and I have like I don't understand dialectics, and I was actually participating in a grad student action, like a sit-in at the administration building, and I was like, I don't understand dialectics at all, and like it wasn't animus. That's another thing about labor unions. You can get into like heated debates, but like everybody more or less, unless like you cross some certain lines, like everybody's like, no, we're here to help each other. So like,
right.
I'm like, yeah, this doesn't seem useful for me at all. And they're like, well, you got it. And it wasn't animus at all. And
That's good.
At the same action, there was also like a Pete Buttigieg supporter, and there wasn't like screaming or anything, but like you've got basically a neoliberal worker against basically a shit ton of ANCOMs just being like, whoa, Bernie, and maybe a Maoist, I think.
Yeah, geez.
Like I think there's a Maoist among my old comrades ranks, so but I guess that is focused on me. I don't know how it got on that tangent, but like that's just like some of my experiences with how organized labor is beneficial and like in many senses very healthy.
Yeah, I know. It was one of those things like among atheism, we did like we often heard people preach the idea that there could be disagreements and still no animus and people would be friendly. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I felt like there was a lot of like real anger towards people who didn't believe the same way. And I know that it often got the pro-social justice side, the regressive left, was often like framed as the ones doing all the anger, but that's not my experience. Like I experienced far more anger from the other side.
Right. And for all the, we can disagree, I think it is virtue signaling, by the way. For all that virtue signaling that there was a lot of disagreement that, went to some pretty dark places and very unproductive disagreement, I should add.
And especially if you started talking about racial justice and like gender issues, like it was very much like as soon as you brought up feminism, like there was women who were having rape threats thrown their way, right? Like, I'm sorry, but that's not a friendly disagreement anymore.
Yep.
So I don't know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we've gotten more or less through the history. because, I think everything's pretty much dissolved. And what I said in that thread was, uh, either you were an old atheist and you joined Indivisible, you were a young atheist and maybe you became like pro Bernie Sanders or like became a commie, or or you became a MAGA right wing, uh,
Yeah.
MAGA head. And I'm not sure, I'm still not sure how many Trumper atheists there are. I can, you've got Ayan Hirsi Ali and you've got Robert Price,
James Lindsay.
James Lindsay. You've got James Lindsay. That's a whole thing in and of itself.
Yep.
Oh, James Lindsay. You could do a whole episode on James Lindsay.
I'd have to get Aaron from Embrace the Void on.
Right. Man. But that's like three prominent people. And again, these are just like leaders, quote unquote. So I don't know how well that maps on to the actual movement. What I will say is that I still think like alt-right sentiment is heavily religious or at least spiritual, along with, fascism often comes with a mythologized past,
Yeah.
which doesn't necessarily have to entail supernatural beliefs. I think you can have a secular, founding fathers narrative of the US. But I guess speaking of Aaron, when we were in our like Facebook argument group, you may have seen this dust up where, somebody in our argument group ended up palling around with Kyle Rittenhouse.
Oh yeah, I heard
in
about
Kenosha.
that.
Yeah. I actually, I legit argued with that person in that Facebook group.
Yeah, I
along
recall that.
with a few other people. And there were, before that point in that Facebook group, I had argued with people. I'm like, these people seem kind of crypto. And then this person that I'm referring to, Ryan Balch, and his crew, when they came into the group, I was like, these are neo-Nazis. They are unquestionably, like, it wasn't even like, are they not? Like, this was unquestionable. And they were also like very, very, very Catholic. Like there is a very large sentiment of like, reclaim Constantinople. Like there is a Catholic fash, like trad fash, like sentiment on the internet that's very healthy right now, even if fairly underground. So like, I think that's important to keep in mind. But like, again, I think, if they didn't become like Bernie Sanders supporters, they became like hardline, like MAGA, make America great again. Like it, like you look at the young people today, like under 40, normie politics is like disappearing, and people are becoming, I guess, populist. That's a bad term because it can be misinterpreted in a lot of ways. But I think neoliberalism is not popular among us, who also tend to be, the young tend to be more religious. People are becoming more religious every day, and neoliberalism is not very popular. So there's like two roads you can go down.
Right. Yeah.
So,
I mean,
I guess that's my account, but
no, that's perfect. It's cool to kind of hash this out a little bit, because after everybody kind of went their own ways, like, sure, you still get your small pockets of people talking online and whatever, but I don't have that much actual interaction based on like about the atheist community anymore. And nobody's, I don't know that I've heard anybody doing the breakdown of what happened.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I saw is everybody more or less realized that religion maybe wasn't the sticking point. And
Yeah.
I say this as somebody who like started like one of those Facebook fan groups. Like I was the admin of the Scathing Atheist Puzzle in the Thunderstorm group until like 2 weeks ago. Actually,
Oh, wow.
I just left. There's no drama, absolutely no drama. I just haven't been on Facebook for a year and a half. Like I was finishing up my grad degree, and like I could have left a year and a half ago. I just was too lazy to get around to it. But like
Yeah.
the Scathing Atheist guys, I mean, God Awful Movies is a funny show, like
Yep.
still,
Yep.
and I think they're sort of the exception because they really hammer down on the religion is still causing all this problem, and and don't get me wrong, I think religion still causes a lot of problems. I think their model, to be respectful of them, because I consider them at least friendly, if not friends. It is a bit overdetermined, in my opinion.
I think that's right. Like, the religion as the problem. Like, I can see often like the religious style of thinking, like that belief in things without reasonable justification. Like that's all still important stuff, right? But yeah, just saying like the whole religion is bad isn't 100% accurate anymore.
Right. I mean, I think, I would say given the choice, I'd like definitely not have religion.
Yeah.
And I guess, I should ask your opinion because there is sort of like a growing, Dawkins put out a tweet, again, foot and mouth disease, but like he was, praising the church bells in contrast to the harsh and ugly, a call to prayer. And like Brett Stevens and Eric Weinstein have more or less implicitly signed on to like, we need to keep religion because otherwise people will be, evil or bad or something.
Right.
I think there is something to, I think I alluded to this earlier. I think there is something to having like a moral community of some sort that is able to organize. I like the idea of those organizing spaces. I don't know how you feel about it, but I do kind of miss that as like a center for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I never had I was never a religious person.
Oh, okay.
So for me, I never I got my moral center from philosophy, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that doesn't necessarily work en masse the way that religion does. So and it's
that might play into my bias a bit because I was like a liberal Christian.
Okay.
So like I was I believed in theistic evolution. And I don't really see any contradiction for the most part. Like I think you can, if you take certain parts of the Bible non-literally, there's really no, I mean, there's also, there's not really any limit to what you can't do if you like pick and choose. I will say.
True.
But
that's true.
If your precepts allow you to pick and choose, then there's nothing anybody can really argue against you that like there's no internal contradiction, at least. Almost
that's true. Yeah. That's right.
So I mean and my priest I had growing up in the Catholic Church, thinking back to him, he might have been a bit of a heretic, I think. I was actually raised. I was born on a Native American reservation. I wasn't raised on it, but I went to this Catholic church on an Apache reservation. So I'm decently aware of and familiar with Apache culture and just the way I'm at least familiar with that community. and this Catholic priest actively incorporated some
Yep.
Apache rituals. Like, and if you know Catholicism is very stringent on like certain practices. Like, you can't get married outside, stuff like that. There's
Right.
like a lot of really like very strict rules.
Yeah, so mixing and matching there,
Yeah.
it's not really part of the deal.
Yeah, and this priest, like, we would sing Christmas carols around Christmas time to like impoverished people, but we'd go to the hospital, but we would also sing Christmas carols in the prison. Like, we would sing to the prisoners, and this priest was like very active, with like at least practice with prisoners. So like maybe in that sense, there was instilled in me the sense that like prisoners aren't bad people,
right,
by necessity. So, you know, I am definitely not coming at this from like a hardline ex-Christian fundamentalist perspective. Like, I am, in a sense, somewhat like coming from a culturally pragmatist Christian perspective.
Yeah, I think that's fair. A lot of people, I don't have a spiritual side to me per se, but a lot of people seem to require that. Maybe in a utopian society when everybody's treated equally and has their basic needs met, then we don't need that anymore. But at the moment, some people need a spiritual guide or spirituality to guide their life. Yeah. And I mean,
do you think spirituality as a term has any value to you? Like, this is a serious question, because there are a lot of like materialists who will argue that like spirituality has some sort of meaning to them.
Yeah, I don't think it really has any meaning to me. Mm-hmm. Like, I guess it depends on what you mean by spirituality too, right?
It's
like,
a fuzzy term, but yeah.
Yeah. Like, I do believe, like, I say that I have faith in mankind or humanity, right? Mm-hmm. Or I believe in the spirit of goodness, like, that people share. Mm-hmm. Stuff like that. I don't think of it as spirituality so much as psychology.
Right. No, I mean, I more or less agree. I mean, that being said, like, there is something to like the church services I attended where you're like sharing in community with, like, you know, something transcendent. Right. Even if that transcendence doesn't exist. And like, there's something, I've been to Sunday assembly and there's just not necessarily something there. But, you know, I have felt that sense of transcendence in other places. I haven't done acid yet, but like a very, very good concert. Like, there are some concerts I've been to. My favorite concerts, like Godspeed You Black Emperor, just like sound all around me. Like, I feel like I'm being lifted into the air. There is something to it, especially when you're participating in like a large group of people. And maybe even like some of the like the political actions I've been to, like
I can see that.
Like, there is something, and like that march, that aforementioned march I mentioned in Denver after Charlottesville, there is something to being in a large group with a singular purpose, like sharing in something bigger than ourselves. And even though I don't believe in any like spooky metaphysics, that feeling that is there, that builds people together, I think can, in a sense, be described as spiritual and maybe very meanable, especially for building communities.
I think that's fair.
And atheism just doesn't. Actually, I'll make some exceptions, but like, there have been very few and far between experiences that matched that sense of spirituality among atheists that I've felt elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know if I have a yes and, but but I think that's a fair statement.
I mean, this past like hour has been, a lot of my sentiments. Like a lot of my sentiments are playing into it. I totally respect anybody else who like disagrees vehemently with this. Like, but there is a sense of spirituality. Like, also, I meditate every day, so there you go.
There you go.
Yeah. Maybe I'm a little Buddhist too.
Well, that's fair. I mean, that's all right too.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I used to be like, when I was in the atheist community, I was very like, oh, well, it's just utter nonsense. It's got no value, blah, blah, blah. And I just don't feel that way anymore. So when you say like that these events have a spiritual aspect to them, I mean, I can see that. It like I have felt like situations where where you feel like your whole body, your heart fills up and your body fills up with this kind of feeling that it's hard to describe. And I can understand how that could be considered spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, facts don't care about our feelings. So, I mean, maybe transcendent is a better word, but
maybe.
There's not really a term that quite encapsulates.
No, that's
other than spiritual. Like it gets at something, at least.
It's hilarious to me that Ben Shapiro is the person that coined that.
He's a fucking, if you listen to his episode with Sam Harris, he's basically a presuppositionalist.
Yeah.
Is like, as far as I'm concerned, that's like an epistemological dead end. Like you just, once you're like a presup, there's nowhere to go with that. Like it's just, I mean, it's not a very convincing argument if you're not a presup, but there's nothing you can say to a presup that will wedge itself
that's
in
right.
there. It's a sticky wicket, as it were.
Yeah. And for anybody who doesn't know what a presuppositionalist is, I'll put a link in the show notes or something.
Yeah.
It's another messy one.
It's quite annoying. Yeah.
But I think I've taken enough of your time.
But yeah,
where can people find you?
I mean, do you like this account? Like, you don't have to co-sign. Like, I think it is worth discussing, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I think that a lot of people have assigned like the reactionary right as the majority of atheists. Right. Like that got the media headlines or something somehow. And, I mean, like we had people, who was it? Like there was a guy, he wrote a book called, Atheists Can't Be Republicans if They Believe in Reason and Logic. I think that's what it was. Evidence and Logic.
I'm with you. I remember that book existing, and I don't remember the author.
I can't remember the name of the author, but at the time, he almost like said that all atheists were, well, not all, but he said the majority of atheists were like these. They weren't using. They were bigots and whatnot, and that we weren't using logic and reason accurately. And there was a nuance to his argument that I agreed with, but also there's like that somehow got to be the headline, was that atheists are now bigots and right wings, nut bars, and you know, and that's just not. I don't know. There's more lefties that I think in the atheist community than there were right wingers, but they got the headlines.
Yeah, I mean, we've just kind of shut up about it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're just all like.
For better or worse, we've shut
Moving
up.
on.
Yeah,
for sure.
But I did interrupt you. I can give my information.
Sounds good.
You can find me on Twitter at Gerbivore, herbivore with a J, because I'm vegetarian. Though I pretty much shut up about that too. I'll see if I've been meaning to put out more videos on my channel. I don't know, just follow me on Twitter, and if I ever put up a video, YouTube's algorithm has probably given up on me far and away at this point.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking of more content on like actually what I alluded to at the beginning of the hour, like science communication and its intersection with actual organizing, and maybe some more of my own thoughts on politics and all that bullshit. So
yeah, I mean, I really liked the stuff you did put out when you were creating content. So
thanks, likewise. And again, it's good to we probably haven't talked in a couple years, but it's good to say hi again. And
yeah, for sure.
And I enjoy your content. And even though like I'm not as I probably follow under like the commie umbrella. I'm not as open about the C word, but like I'm glad I'm glad someone like you is like putting a friendly face on it. So yeah.
Thanks for joining me.
Take care. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. Remember to share the show with your friends and on social media. Thank you to everyone who supports this show on Patreon. Every dollar I get makes it so that I can feed my family and keep a roof over our head. So it's really, really appreciated. If you can contribute or want to contribute, you can do that at patreon.com/skepticalleftist, or you can send me money at paypal.me/brainstormpodcast. If you can't contribute financially, that is fine. A 5-star rating and a review on your podcast app of choice or on one of the podcast review sites like Podchaser would be great. If you want to find more from me, then make sure to check out my Linktree at linktree/skepticalcory. You can find all my social media stuff there, as well as links to my other shows, which include Skeptarchy, which is a panel show I do with some very smart people. From Many People's Strength, which is a podcast about Saskatchewan politics, and The Feminist Family, which I do with my partner. My Twitter is @HardcoreSkeptic, and my Facebook page is The Mind of a Skeptical Leftist, or you can send me a friend request at facebook.com/CJBrainstorm. I do accept most friend requests. Thank you so much for listening or watching, and remember that the truth does seem to have a left-wing bent.